So thank you everyone for joining today's coffee break, where we're going to be revealing the results of the Big SCOM survey in its second year. This is where you share with us your plans for SCOM for now and for the future. But before we dig in, just a quick reminder that, as always, we run conversations over on Slack. If you go to scomathon.com/Slack, you can join our Slack channel. There's a dedicated channel for this coffee break today. So if you have any thoughts, any questions you want to put to our awesome panel, then you can do so there. We'll also be keeping an eye on the GoToWebinar chat and Q&A, but we prefer Slack because then it lives forever rather than just for the duration of the webinar. So, without further ado, let's introduce today's panel. Starting with myself, I'm Bruce Cullen. I'm the Director of Products at Cookdown, and I guess you're probably rather familiar with hearing me speak. So let's get on to the more interesting people. So with me, I have Akash. Hello, Akash. How are you?
Hey, Bruce. I'm doing good.
Good.
Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you back. Akash, you've been with us before. You're the Program Manager for the SCOM Product Group. Who better to talk about the future of SCOM than someone from the SCOM Product team? Then we have with us Harold Dyke. Harold, hello.
Hey, Bruce, how you doing?
I'm good. Good to have you with us. Harold, you're President and CEO of Silect.
Great to be here.
Great to have you. Jonas, you're next. You are the Technical Business Developer at OpsLogix. Hello.
Hi there, everyone.
Hey, good to have you back once more. Then we have Richard Benwell, Founder and CEO of SquaredUp. Hello, Richard. Oh, are you muted?
I was going to say we didn't plan this video appearance, but I quite like how we've done that, just so we all appear on the screen.
There you go, perfect. As long as you're there, that's the main thing. Good to have you with us. And then finally, we have Christian. Christian, you're a product manager for NICE. Hello.
Hi there.
Hello.
Great. Thanks for setting this up.
Not at all. So we have a very, very big and panel filled with experience, and it's going to be a great joy to have you all with us to go through the results of the Big SCOM survey. So, what was the Big SCOM survey? We asked you all, dear attendees, 27 questions in a survey. We took your answers anonymously, and we asked you essentially, how do you use SCOM today, and what are your plans for the future of SCOM? We asked exactly the same questions this year as last year, so we can see stuff that's changed, stuff that's stayed about the same, and just generally how people are using SCOM. And so thank you everybody who completed it. So let's start off by looking at submissions. So in 2020, we had 118 submissions to the Big SCOM survey. This year we had 81, so a few less there, but still a good response there. Not really sure why that might be. We could take a guess, but we would just be guessing. But it's worth noting this up front. All of the data you'll see where we're comparing things is done in percentage form, so this shouldn't be a problem when we're looking at the data. So
we need to help spread the word next year. Try and get the word out about the Big SCOM survey.
The more we could do. If you've got a friend who works in SCOM or is involved, tell them. The more views, the better. It helps shape the feedback of the product. So let's have a look. The first category that our questions have kind of fit into is generally, how are you using SCOM? What's the shape of your SCOM deployment, and what other tools do you have? So the first question in this area was, how many management groups do you have in your SCOM landscape? To my mind, this isn't super surprising, apart from some of the higher end numbers, 101 to 500. I'm guessing we've got some MSPs responding there, but the vast majority of people having one management group, or 0 to 1 management group to be precise. There were some people that were answering that did have 0, or 1 person, I think. Unless my panel wants to chip in and say anything on that, I will move on to the number of management.
Just one, Bruce. I think it's always it's useful just to look at these simple questions. Maybe someone like sort of Jonas could talk to some of the reasons why people run multiple management groups. I think there's certainly some large environments that you need to split up, but I guess there are other reasons to run multiple management groups, and it's sort of not uncommon to do that through sort of segregating your monitoring. Or I guess does that also count for running multiple versions? And maybe that's another reason why you run multiple management groups.
It certainly could do. Panel, any thoughts?
Maybe service providers, right? So if I have 500 customers and everybody wants to have SCOM, and I can set up a 500 management groups, right?
Yeah. The classic one I hear is the whole, we've got one for test, one for prods, being the reason for sort of 2. Any other thoughts, panel?
Yeah, I guess it's surprising a little bit the number who responded just one management group, just on the point you mentioned about having a dev test, a pre-prod environment, and a prod environment, which is really a best practice for most SCOM customers.
Yeah, I would agree with that totally. Always good to make sure your changes aren't going to break anything before you make them live, and there's no other way to do that. All right, moving on then. How many management servers do you have in your SCOM landscape? So again, the biggest number being the 1 to 5 category, but really a very broad spread right through to 70 plus. Interestingly, some not sures in there, which is surprising to see. Panel, what's your take on this set of data? No immediate thoughts?
Again, just at the low end, running more than one management server. It'd be interesting to know how many run just one and how many run more than one just one management server. A risk if that goes down, your monitoring goes down, whereas having multiple obviously gives that redundancy.
Yeah.
So the main reason why we see customers with many management services if they're doing a lot of Linux monitoring, because that's where there's a scalability challenge. So where they have maybe 20, 30, or 40 management servers to handle the Linux systems, since they are Linux and AIX system are passive agents, they always put a lot of load on the management server. So that's what we see the main reason why there might be a number of management servers in resource pools grouped together.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Interesting. Yeah, certainly redundancy and failover is the main reason we see for the most common case. Did not actually know about AIX and Linux putting a greater load on the management service. That's interesting. Thank you. Next up,
Bruce,
we have
another interesting question that we can probably ask next time is how many management groups do users have in their environment?
Hold that thought. That's coming. We have that question.
Okay.
So that's good. But first up, we have how many gateways do you have in your SCOM landscape? So I'm not sure whether to be surprised at the large number of 0 gateways or whether to have expected that. I guess if you're running a prod and non-prod kind of setup, you may not necessarily have gateways in your non-prod, but at the same time, I would have expected probably 1 to 5 to be the winning, it was the winning category, essentially. There's also, interestingly, 141 plus gateways, some people with a very large number of gateways. Any thoughts from the panel here?
Just on the no gateways, we've got a question later about just how many agents are in the environment. And I think the sort of surprise there is that there are still many small environments with SCOM. Christian, you've got some stories about some mega environments, and we know that the SCOM really does scale up high, but I think a reminder within these results is that there are still a lot of smaller deployments of SCOM. So for example, if you're monitoring just a kind of quite well-known set of on-prem servers, you might not need those gateways to pull in data from other networks.
Yep, makes sense. So there's a question that's just come in from the chat. What do you consider as a small environment? Well, the next slide will answer that one quite nicely, which is how many agents do you have in your SCOM landscape? So the most common answer for this one was 1,001 to 2,000 agents. So that being the average, anything below average would be considered smaller, I guess, based on this survey's results. What do you think, panel?
I would consider a smaller environment between 0 and 100 at least from my opinion.
Yeah. I would say personally anything under 1,000. All right.
Yeah, I think SCOM has an overhead, obviously setting up the database and management servers and getting to grips with all of the management paradigms. I think sort of running it for under 100 agents is typically where it starts to to become quite hard as a trade-off between that sort of overhead and the value you get out of it. So certainly that's quite surprising, but still sort of 10% of people running those small environments. Sort of several hundred, then I think is where it starts to pay out a bit more. And as you say, Bruce, when you get up to 1,000, I think that's where SCOM really starts to sort of see value in the investment you put into it.
Yeah, it's designed to be used at scale. It works well in that scenario. Perfect. So the next question, the age-old, what version of SCOM do you run in production? So there aren't really any surprises there, but there is a bit of a change here. which is a positive change in that more people have upgraded to SCOM 2019 and away from the unsupported 2012 R2 and 1801/1807 versions. And the good news is the person that had SCOM 2007 or older last year has got rid of it or hasn't responded, whichever is most appropriate. No real surprise, just good news, I think, for SCOM. Any comments from the panel on this one?
Well, just a reminder of support dates. What are they? So 2012 is about to hit end of extended.
Yeah, I was going to talk about that, and it's good to see the decrease in the previous SCOM versions. Again, SCOM 2016 just went out of mainstream support this month on 11th of January 2022. 2012 is in extended support until next year, June, I assume. And then 2019 is going to be serviced. We are going to release an update roll-up soon in this half year, hopefully. And then we also have the next version of System Center coming up, which includes SCOM 2022. So we look to see this the blue curve, or the blue line, increasing more and more on the newer versions.
Yeah, that's certainly what we'd hope. And as you say, support will drive that. Very good. What do you use SCOM to monitor? So this one is interesting to me for one reason, one big reason. There's no real surprises here in sort of technologies that people use SCOM to monitor. It is really, really awesome for anything Microsoft. It's best of breed for Microsoft and anything Windows. It will do a great job of Linux as well, and all the sort of bits of application and infrastructure that go around it, which is loosely what we see here. The thing that's interesting about this graph to me is when I layer on last year's data, it's almost the same, very, very similar. But the biggest change, at least to my eye, is this change here. More Office 365. I guess that's down to Akash, your team's M365 MP that came out last year from memory, and V2 out really recently. But other than that, very, very similar pattern. Panel, what are your thoughts?
You can also see an increase in the server hardware. That's pretty interesting to see as well, as many shift more towards the cloud.
Yeah, very true, very true.
I guess, Bruce, just a question on the data that we're looking at. So if we look at the Windows Server column, for example, are we saying that 10% of customers are monitoring Windows servers? Or
no, that's a good question. So that's 10% of 100%. People, when responding to this question, this is a multi-select question, so you can select everything here if you want. Yeah.
Because I would certainly guess, or I mean, the customers that we have shown us that Windows Server, virtually all SCOM customers that we have anyway monitor Windows Server.
Yes, yeah. I would be very surprised if there are any using SCOM that aren't monitoring Windows servers. Yeah, that's a good question. There's I was expecting this question. Do you have a release date for SCOM 2022? Coming in the chat. I'll let you answer that one, Akash. Oh, looks like you're muted.
No, I was saying I cannot commit to it, but yeah, hopefully in the next in the next few months.
Rest assured, we'll let you know when it's here. It's exciting for us all. But good question to ask. There's another question. Maybe we can add those who are monitoring Windows 10 non-Windows server versions. Interesting. Well, there is another option. So there is a free text box we give you when you fill in this survey. So if people were monitoring versions, they could type them. The data got sanitized so that if there were loads of people saying Windows 10, we would have pulled it out. So there was an option for people to say whatever they want in their survey data, just not necessarily with the checkbox. But that is an interesting takeaway as well. There aren't many people using SCOM to monitor desktop OSs. Not surprising, but interesting. All right, moving on. How long has your organization been using SCOM? Now, no surprise in the middle, loads of people have been using it for a long period of time. SCOM is very sticky, and that's because it does a great job of monitoring what you're using it to monitor. So why move from it? But the really key takeaway personally is at the bottom end, the 0 to 1 years and up to 3 years sort of brackets, we've got people coming in at the bottom. So there are new people picking up SCOM, which is really, really awesome. It's not just the people that already had it. Any comments, questions, panel?
Yeah, I think it's a good reminder that there are people still new to SCOM, still learning SCOM. I think you've got another question there about how long have you been in SCOM as well. So I think for all of us, you know, for Microsoft, for the vendors, and also for the community, just to remember that there are people still coming to SCOM anew and then having to get their head around it and figure out how to get the most out of it. And hopefully that's why, something like SCOMathon is a great place to find useful content and advice and a community. And we'll talk a little bit later about community being one of the real strengths of SCOM. So hopefully those people who are new to SCOM and organisations that are picking it up for the first time, have a great community around them to help them get the most out of it.
Totally agree. Community is very important. Having somewhere you can go to find answers, and SCOM does have that. Moving on. What other tools do you use for monitoring? So this one's always quite interesting. Clearly SCOM, this is obviously in addition to SCOM. SCOM doesn't feature in this list. And this again was a multi-select, so people could check multiple things. The biggest sort of jump in this year's data over last year is the other column, which I'll dig into in a second because I've pulled out what people filled in. This was a text box, so people could put anything they wanted in here. But before I go and do that, are there any thoughts, comments on the rest of this data from the panel?
Well, I think that we see a lot of new, many organizations use a lot of different tools. It's very common that you maybe have 5-10 different monitoring tools. So I think this data looks pretty accurate, actually.
Yeah. Last year, I think it was, in addition to SCOM, 2.5 additional tools on average that people were using. Very few people say we only have SCOM, and that's one of the answers in none, even though you just don't take anything.
And I guess the decrease from SolarWinds is what's going into other than.
It certainly looks like a decrease in SolarWinds and a decrease in Splunk is interesting. Small decrease in VROps and Azure Monitor. Here, an increase in Dynatrace, small increase in Zabbix. Yeah. Any other thoughts, comments on that slide while I click into chat? No, all right. There are a few questions in chat, but I'll come back to them at the end if they're not sort of contextual to now. So these are the tools that appeared in the other sections. This is, as you can see, a real mixed bag. We've got all sorts here. A large list of tools. There is a teeny bit of repetition, but most of these are one-time hits, mostly, or they haven't been picked up by Splunk because it's Splunk and Dynatrace, etc. But a lot of tools here. Some I've not even heard of. I had to do a bit of Googling, which is always a good thing. I spent a while Googling trying to find.
I like the only SCOM tool.
Yeah, only SCOM. Yeah, I know. Given it was a multi-choice, you didn't have to pick anything. Someone did feel compelled to tell us only SCOM in text. So let that stay up on screen for a moment longer so everyone could take it in. And if the panel wants to comment, they can.
Some of it, let's say application insights. I know it's a technically it's a separate tool, but it does fall under the Azure Monitor tree.
Yes.
So probably that one. And I mean, saying we can discount that, we can discount only SCOM, and yeah, those are a couple of them. Yeah.
But basically, the thing to say on this list is there weren't multiple hits for each of these. These are all unique entries. So lots of people wanting to have their say, which is really, really good. Yeah. So let's move on. Next up, we have questions relating to who is the person administering SCOM? What do they look like? What do they do? What experience do they have? That kind of thing. So starting with, what are your primary responsibilities? Well, there's no surprise that SCOM is top left, the thing that people do the most of when they're answering a survey about SCOM. No surprise that comes with Windows monitoring and other monitoring duties. But basically, there's a lot of everything in here. Slight increase in consultancy, slight increase in network monitoring, and ITSM tool administration, but no large swings from last year's data here. Just interesting, essentially, to see that there aren't many people that just have SCOM administration. That will come out a bit later on in the next slide when we look at job title as well. Are there any comments from our panel?
I think that more people should probably have a more responsibility for SCOM, because it's a pretty big role to address actually.
Yeah.
So many of them have separate roles working with different things, and that's probably a reason many times why it failed.
Totally agree.
I think also, Bruce, there's definitely a shifting landscape around monitoring, with more adoption of cloud, and with application teams looking at an SRE and DevOps model. So certainly within the audiences we speak to, there's an evolving terminology around monitoring as well, as monitoring goes from just the infrastructure monitoring and sort of Windows monitoring to towards application monitoring. I don't think that's really sort of settled anywhere yet. Do you monitor the cloud? Are you a platform team? Do you monitor just the workloads on the cloud? So there's definitely some changes there that have to sort of really kind of come through as we sort of realise what a future of monitoring looks like.
Yes, totally. There's more coming up on sort of the shape of SCOM and cloud a bit later on. But interesting to see cloud monitoring is in here, but it isn't significantly up on last year. But there's, from data later on, a demand for more cloud monitoring, which is interesting. But we'll dig into that in a bit. Moving on then to what is your job title. So the thing that was quite telling for me here is, if you look at the bottom two bars here, the more general job titles that involve not just SCOM, but other bits and pieces too, infrastructure engineer and IT administrator, there are fewer of those, but there are more of people that are in a monitoring specific role. So people who identify as a SCOM administrator or monitoring engineer rather than something more general. In fact, if I stack SCOM administrator on top of monitoring engineer, that's quite a significant number of people that have responded to the survey. So there are some companies that are realizing that SCOM does need somebody to look after it, or at least monitoring needs somebody looking at it. And I suspect that at the bottom end, this is just a guess, the drop off in the sort of more general roles is more down to those people not engaging with the survey rather than them not being there and not being involved in SCOM. What do you think, panel?
Well, what we've seen is that the maturity of monitoring has really gained within the organizations. So I think that the more priority it will get within the organization, the more people actually start working with monitoring specifically. So I think this is really good.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's reflected.
I think that's shown also by some of the other data points, some of the other job titles that you see on the list here with either security or development. We certainly see developers involved in to a certain extent within the monitoring environment. So, and business analysts as well.
Yes, and you're starting to see that come out through the sort of questions we've got later on as well. But there's definitely a lot of data in here that says, people are upping their maturity when it comes to SCOM, which is great. Awesome news. It means they've got a higher chance of succeeding. Any other thoughts on this one before we move on? All right. If not, the next one, how long have you been using SCOM? So to my eye, the biggest shift here is that people are shifting, I feel, from this sort of 7 to 10 to this 11 to 13 bracket. So my guess is that just basically as people have sticked with SCOM, they've shifted up this bracket we've created here in our results data on this year over last year. There are a couple of interesting things here. There are some people that have been around SCOM since 21 years or more, which is a very long time, very, very mature and large amount of skills in SCOM out there. Also really good to see that people are coming in at the bottom end as well and are picking up SCOM afresh. So in the 0 to 1 and 2 to 3 year categories as well. Panel, thoughts?
I think that we see a lot of new people coming in now. So I think it's really important with this community stuff that you're doing to take care of the new people. And also a big shout out to TopCore and Bob that's arranging these, basic fundamental SCOM admin courses, just taking care of all these new resources, because I think it's really important to bring in new people into the community of SCOM as well.
Totally agree. There's a question to that effect in the chat window. Does Microsoft provide any certifications in SCOM? And if not, what's their plan? So worth mentioning what you just said there, Jonas, about sort of TopCore's offering, which is awesome. But I'll let Akash speak to this one as well.
I'm sorry, I had to step away for a minute. I'm guessing the question on Microsoft certification on SCOM?
Correct.
Yeah, we do not have any plans for now. maybe we can think about it, or hear more conversations around the certification, and we can chalk out a plan. But as of now, we do not have any plans.
No worries. Well, that's question answered. As you say, Eunice, have a look at what Topcore are offering. Also, obviously, have a look at everything else that is SCOMathon. We do these webinars monthly. We do go very deep. We also cover introductory topics as well. And we have a very large back catalogue of things that are all entirely relevant to today. So do go and check out that stuff as well. Any other thoughts on this slide? And if not, moving on. So the next sort of category really from this data is how people are integrating SCOM and how they're interacting with and handling alerts, essentially. Starting with my favorite question from this category, which is how do you send, or do you send alerts from all monitoring tools into a single tool? More people this year are saying yes than ever before, which is really good news. Again, that speaks to maturity, as people have realized, in order to succeed, we need all of our tools to communicate in a uniform way. And the way we need to do that is to send all of our alerts into a single tool. So we have that unification. As far as the sort of data is concerned, the biggest point of interest for me is that Jira features. Speaking to something you said earlier, Harold, about developers being involved, Jira is obviously a ticketing system, but for engineering primarily. We use it internally at Cookdown for engineering and for help desk. So that's really interesting to see. No other sort of comments from me. I'll let you discuss, panel. What do you think on this data?
Do you have some background data on the big one, which even has increased?
I do, but not to hand. I didn't put it on slide because it was a very large selection of one-offs again. There were no sort of like patterns or correlation in there. I can dig it out and send it to you afterwards, and it will be on the blog, which has all the results on, which is published today, I think, but not to hand, I'm afraid. Not to hand.
Something we talked about as a group before the webinar was around surveying the use of other system center tools. So that's maybe a question we'll sort of add to in the future. But just kind of a reminder there, the service manager is is common still in the world of using SCOM. So ServiceNow, I think, very dominant generally within the ITSM space, but service manager still important there, especially if you've invested in SCOM already.
Yeah, very true. And if you've invested in SCOM, as you say, you've alluded to, you've invested in System Center, so you have it. So yeah, makes total sense. Any other thoughts?
I like to see Micro Focus Ops Bridge there, because I have myself worked for that for a number of years and know how the integration works to that. So I really been surprised to see it rising, but it might be a lack of alternatives or not knowing the background, but definitely an option as a manager of manager tool.
From going through the sort of raw data, because when I was creating these charts, Ops Manager and Micro Focus Ops Manager featured, there were 3 different tools. There was Ops Bridge, Ops Manager, and Ops Console or something that came out of last year's data, and they may well be in the other category for this year as well. There's more of that, or of the Micro Focus tools, than just what you see on here, which was interesting to see. There's a question in the chat that sort of relates to this. I've been saving it for this slide, which is, does Microsoft have a strategy to correlate all the different alerts incoming from multiple tools into one console? Are there any plans in this area, Akash?
Not anytime soon, but yes, we are looking at a couple of things. One is the DevOps model within monitoring tools, and the other one is, Azure Monitor is what is going to be, the full-fledged monitoring tool from Microsoft. I'm sure SCOM will be there as well. We want to see how we can deeply integrate SCOM with Azure Monitor, right? So Azure Monitor being the destination for all the source. And if there is a demand, we can look at two-way as well, the other way as well.
Makes sense. Good to hear. There's a deeper integration with Azure Monitor being looked at. That definitely comes up later on. Other thing that's worth saying here is, obviously being biased, but Cookdown, which is where I come in, make integrations for SCOM. We have an ad at the end of the slide, but we get data into SCOM and integrate SCOM with a whole bunch of other places as well. So you can do this really easily without writing code. I'll give a proper plug to it later. So there are third-party solutions on the market that will allow you to achieve this as well.
It's worth noting there, Bruce, you got SCOM on that list, right? So people are both
Yes.
using SCOM as the central place to collect alerts from monitoring tools, potentially as well as sending alerts from SCOM into mostly a ticketing tool, obviously from the list here, right? Mostly those others are ticketing tools apart from Azure Monitor. There was a question I think we would have seen on Slack there around how SCOM alert subscriptions is considered too many. It's not something we ask in the survey. That's maybe something we could survey on in future years around sort of setup of subscriptions. But sort of kind of ties in this topic here. Are there scalability limits to the number of subscriptions you can set up on SCOM? Not that anyone's hit by the sounds of it. Yeah.
I've heard.
No, I'm not. Yeah, even I'm not aware of the limit per se. Is it I'm guessing this is the notification channel subscription?
Yeah.
I'm not aware of it. But then something which I wanted to talk about, since the topic of subscription came about, is we are looking at setting up Teams integration channel for the SCOM 2022. And that, again, just the word, since alert subscription came about, I thought, let me just talk about something to look forward to in 2022.
That will be something to look forward to. I look forward to getting my hands on that as soon as I can, Akash. Very cool. Yes, it makes sense. And Rich, I have heard anecdotally that something along the lines of not so much a hard-coded limit, but a theoretical limit to notification channels. But it's anecdotal rather than from data.
I think the biggest issue with the notification channels is the number of that you can push actually at the same time, so it will start to drop things. I think that's the biggest disadvantage with the notification channel, that you cannot have too many concurrent calls.
Yeah. Sounds familiar. All right, moving on then to the next question. How do you create dashboards and reports for SCOM? So the biggest point of interest for me here is this one. More people have answered none to this question. To my mind, dashboards and some kind of reporting are vital to providing sanity on a large list of alerts, essentially. Interestingly, I didn't sort of highlight this. There is a drop in the number of people using the console. It could be that simply people are giving up on the console and reverting to none. Don't know. But other than that, broadly the same sort of sets of data, with the operations console winning, followed by SquaredUp, followed by the SCOM web console, and then the native reporting console. Then we have free Power BI, and then live maps, and then Grafana. Any other comments from my panel?
Just again, correlating this with the size of the environments. There are some small environments out there that are monitoring fewer than 100 agents, let's say. So that may just be setting up alerts on on those monitors, and that's all you need it for, right? Just to monitor a few servers and be alerted when there are issues. So certainly in larger environments, you definitely do need to start setting up those dashboards and pushing those out to individual teams who need visibility.
Makes total sense, doesn't it? Ultimately, it's about getting those alerts, consumed and in the face of people who are going to be consuming them. And any way of doing that, dashboards is a great way of doing that, will work. Next up then, how do you tune management packs? So again, the sort of staggering answer for me is some people don't do tuning of their management packs. How do you survive people that don't tune SCOM? But no real surprises of the people who do tune, what tools they use. SCOM console wins. It's great for making quick tweaks and changes. VSAE has gained a bit. Then we have Easy Tune and Silex MP Studio, taking up joint third position here, followed by other. Any thoughts, comments from my panel?
I think to Richard's point on the last slide, I suspect the people that don't tune management packs are likely the smaller environments.
Yes.
Because I think, as we all know, with larger environments, you really need to take a look at those management packs before deployment and make sure they're monitoring the right things and they've got the right thresholds set to define the service levels that you need to attain within your organization.
Yeah, makes sense.
I'm not really sure why you would like to use the authoring extension for tuning, but you know, Harold, that I really love your product. So if I would recommend anything for tuning, it would be Select. So.
I'm obviously biased, and I'm obviously going to say Easy Tune. Easy Tune's the way forward. But then again, that's a Cookdown product, so I would say that, wouldn't I?
No, I think it's different ways of working, right?
Yeah. Ultimately, you know, the thing that matters the most here is that you are successful when trying to tune your management packs to make SCOM work, and for you to tune away the noise that otherwise you're going to get from some of the defaults. They work in some cases and not in others. Yeah. All right. Unless there are any other questions on this one, we'll move on to the next section, which is people's attitude in general towards SCOM. There are some changes here. The first place to start here is our NPS, Net Promoter Score. So NPS is based on this one single question, which is on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to recommend SCOM to a friend or colleague, with 1 being low and 10 being high? The results then come in from obviously 1 to 10. Anything from 1 up to 6, if you respond in that range, then you're considered a detractor. So somebody who is not for the thing you're voting on. Anything 7 to 8 is classed as passive, so neither promoting something or detracting from something. And then 9 and 10, you're classed as a promoter. And that's how this is. Those are the bits of data that go into calculating this. Last year, SCOM got an NPS score of 36, which is very reasonable, very much in the great scale. Very good to see that. This year, it slips ever so slightly from 36 down to 31. So it's still in the great range. People are still recommending it. So good to see overall, but a slight change. Any comments on this one?
I think that's great to see. Really, really good support of SCOM. It may, if there is a significance in that, it may be a shift just on the basis of the need to monitor more cloud resources, which I think we'll sort of see in some of the later slides. You know, if you've got a company that's really investing in cloud or has a plan to migrate to cloud, you know, you wouldn't necessarily go and recommend SCOM right now to deploy that if you're going to go for 100% cloud deployment. So there may be just a practical element of recommending it when it's, you know, the right tool to use.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah, maybe also, you know, towards the pretty steep learning curve to actually to know how SCOM works as well. So it could also reflect that.
Yeah, I would agree. Cool. Moving on then. How many people are involved in administering SCOM? I think this is another slide that speaks to maturity. You know, the one thing to say is there's some where there's 0 people, which is scary in itself, but basically there's a broader shift to more people being involved in administering SCOM, which is really, really positive. This could be that teams are sort of scaling up their SCOM experience and are involving more people, which is good. Yeah, and again, I would say speaks to maturity. Panel, what do you think?
I think this is consistent with what we saw earlier in terms of the various business groups and teams who all have a hand in SCOM in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I think it might also be a bit more developing next to administrating. So some might be more in a developer role, as we've seen earlier. And maybe my comment to the previous slide is basically that really it's getting a bit more difficult to author and develop for SCOM as deeper you go into the application stack, as more you do. So which then you might experience some challenges, right? So, and might affect the Net Promoter Score, because it might be good for the mid-sized company doing all the regular things, but when you really want to go to the depths and develop your own management pack for your custom application, then it gets quite tough, actually.
Yeah.
And then you obviously have cool tools for that, but in the end, that might play into this here.
Yeah,
very true, very true.
We have also seen an increase in the monitoring, team, that more people, they're bringing in all the different monitoring tools into one team that's actually doing monitoring. So, the team increases in size, but they also manage all the different monitoring tools that they have in the same place. So you get more people, but a little bit maybe aligned to that people only work 20% with SCOM because they have the other tools to work with as well.
Exactly. So it could be a set of people who are working on multiple monitoring tools, and that could be, the number is higher. And also we've seen the type of users, it's increased on the consultant side, right? We saw what are your job roles, right? They could be contributing to the number here as well. They could be developers, they could be users, or they could be admins managing their applications.
Yeah, very true, very true. We did say also more people respond with, job titles that were monitoring engineer, so there is some support for that, and more people respond saying they're consultants. So there is support for that in the other data. Very good. Moving on, how do you expect your use of SCOM to change over the next year? So we've got 2020's data and then 2021's data. So focusing on this year's data, so over half of the people surveyed said they're going to continue to grow their use of SCOM, which is great news, phenomenal news. There is also an increase in people saying they're going to reduce, but it's still, below 25%. I would say overall that's a pretty good result. Wouldn't you agree, panel?
I think it's an awesome slide and awesome question. I found it a little bit hard to distinguish between the light blue and the dark blue. So grow is light blue, right? And
grow is light blue.
Dark blue. So I mean, this is phenomenal. And regardless of what perhaps some of the other questions sort of have seen in terms of a shift in response, I think this is a real endorsement of SCOM still, and this idea that there are always multiple monitoring tools, like we've seen on other slides. People use other monitoring tools. SCOM is best of breed. If you're monitoring infrastructure, you're sticking with SCOM, and I think sort of Jonas, you'd made the point sort of when we discussed this before. People are still growing with their data centers. There is a big shift to cloud, but data centers are growing, and it's great to see SCOM. SCOM's growth within that. I think this is really awesome slide.
Yeah, I think it really found it, where it's the best suited solution. Actually, I asked a lot of people before this SCOMathon event, and they said that if they could actually change SCOM to something else, they couldn't even think about any other solution that they would put in place instead of SCOM. So I think this is really good.
Makes sense. Couldn't agree more.
Do we have a double click on the lighter blue side of it, the grow side? Do we have any more data on how do they want to grow?
Yes. Hold that thought. It's coming. 2 slides. Two slides.
Okay.
I guess on that sort of vein, we're going to dig into first reasons when people said they're going to reduce their use of SCOM, why, and then we're going to go through grow. So reduce, this is very similar sort of broad brush strokes to 2020. So the reasons people are looking to reduce their use of SCOM is essentially because of cloud. So weak cloud monitoring, lack of container monitoring, replacing SCOM with Azure Monitor was all sort of speaking to cloud in general. There are a few other odds and sods in here essentially. So we've got SCOM futures unclear, replacing with Elasticsearch, replacing SCOM with another tool, but they didn't specify what that tool was, and increased outsourcing of monitoring. But broad brushstrokes, where people are looking at reducing, it's because of cloud. Jonas, speaking of third-party and community solutions, I understand you have an exciting announcement in this area.
Yeah, we recently just announced that we are working with the Kubernetes management pack to integrate SCOM with your Kubernetes clusters to bring that information into your central IT. And I think it's really important. Kubernetes has different monitoring tools that the developers use, but you still have the IT admins, the infrastructure team that is going to make sure that your cluster is up and running, and they usually they love SCOM, and that's why we would like to bring this functionality into SCOM. So that's something that you can visit on our site to sign up to get more information on.
You'll see more data later on in this survey that would support why that's a good idea, essentially. People are asking for it, which is really good to see, and good to hear you're filling that gap. Any other questions, thoughts, comments from my panel or from anyone else out there, for that matter, on this slide?
Well, something that I would like to bring in from the interviews that I had is that some people are a little bit unsure, about the licensing, because it's so, integrated with the system center licensing that we actually have some people that they had to drop SCOM, even though they didn't want to do it, just because they might, move away from configuration manager or something else that they were using, and they have to drop SCOM because it's integrated into the whole licensing suite. So that could also be, one of the reasons why you are forced to move away from SCOM.
Hi, Cash. Any thoughts, any comments on that? As probably the best placed person to comment on that.
There is not going to be any change in the licensing model. It has got its pros and cons. The customer who would want to go ahead and manage their entire data center, the system center has all of its tools tied together within its licenses. Someone who's having multiple solutions for config management and for service management or for monitoring, that's when the licensing becomes a challenge for them.
Yeah.
But as of now, it remains the same.
Totally. One of the questions, speaking about container monitoring in the chat, is what about OpenShift instead of Kubernetes? Well, I don't know if there's a sort of dedicated monitoring on MP or something for OpenShift out there, but what I can say is we have a customer or two who are looking at integrating OpenShift with our webhooks integration, where they're just pulling in essentially via webhooks the alerts that come from OpenShift very successfully. In fact, that's the reason they've been looking at our offering. So I suggest you do that. Any comments on OpenShift monitoring from the panel?
Well, we see, when it comes to talking about the Kubernetes stuff, that OpenShift is maybe around 90% at the moment when you run it inside of your data center primarily. OpenShift is a big platform that's providing that people are running their Kubernetes clusters on. So that's a big piece of it.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, moving on then. So, Akash, your earlier question, when people say they're going to grow their use of SCOM, why is it? Again, there's no real change here in what the data showed this year on last year. So primarily it's three big areas. Increasing their depth of monitoring. So this is, well, we already have SCOM on all the servers we need it on. We're looking to do more with it. So we're looking to add monitoring, to add depth. So we're going to add in SQL and IIS and blah, blah, blah. There's lots of people saying that. There's lots of people where, as Rich had said earlier, people are expanding their infrastructure. So there's more to monitor. Therefore, they need more SCOM, which makes sense again. And there's always the case of, well, we've had some success with SCOM. We want to be more successful by rolling it out across our entire existing infrastructure. Those three, which are the biggest three pieces of this pie, were the only three from last year. Monitoring Linux servers and application monitoring have been called out as specifics. This year is a change. Application monitoring is particularly interesting, that people are calling out that as a specific item. It makes total sense going beyond simply infrastructure monitoring. Panel, I'm interested to get your thoughts.
I think this all speaks very well to what a great job SCOM is doing for most organizations, and they're going deeper and wider. They're doubling down on their bets on SCOM, and I think obviously for us, those of us who use SCOM or part of SCOM ecosystem, this is great to see.
Mm-hmm. And also that the Linux monitoring has been so mature now, it's working so well that people actually considering throwing out other Nagios-based monitoring system because they just want to manage one system when it comes to the whole high availability, all the people working with it, and we see a lot of growth when it comes to Linux,
which is very cool. Yes, definitely.
Yeah, what I also see is like monitoring more existing infrastructures, like that infrastructure is typically monitored by another monitoring system, which eventually is going to be replaced by SCOM. So that's what I've seen in another case.
So we had a really interesting conversation with a customer recently. So they were looking to monitor more existing infrastructure, and it was exactly as you said. They were using Big Brother. There's a throwback to 2004 as their sort of primary monitoring tool, and they were looking for something a bit more mature, and that's why they were looking to monitor more existing infrastructure. And I've heard that a few times recently. Yeah.
The biggest takeaway is on the the monitoring more existing infrastructure, which is helps make our decisions or towards investment towards SCOM and encourages us at the end of the day, because expanding infrastructure, which is again, it's a linear thing that is an ongoing effort in every IT org, but monitoring more existing infrastructure is more like it's more of an approval to the product, and it's a good sign. And of course, adding depth to the monitoring, that has, of course, been the strong factor of SCOM from day zero.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Any other comments, panel?
As I mentioned before, I think that monitoring has much more priority these days. It's considered as a necessary part when you install or deliver a new application, that you actually put up monitoring on it. So that's what we've seen out in the organization. It's much more well used now than it was maybe a couple of years ago when everything was under development instead. We are now moving into production much more.
To bring in something you said earlier, Rich, on DevOps and more developers being involved. Actually, sorry, maybe it's Harold that said it. I think that's possibly a reason why we're seeing monitoring appearing in more places, because there's a drive from other sort of pieces of the organization for more monitoring in more places, which is really cool. All right, let's move on. How long do you expect to continue using SCOM? So no real big changes, to be honest, from last year, but I think it's phenomenal that the largest result is a long time, 5+ years from our respondents, and that percentage is growing on last year, which is awesome. Yeah. Any other comments from the panel?
Bring on SCOM 2022, that's what I say.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to giving this Teams integration a play. Yes.
Yeah, one small observation was we are seeing a very small number of people on the extreme end of the spectrum. One is new adopters of SCOM, and at the same time a small number of detractors that we see over here, less than 1 year. Right, that's interesting. But yeah, majority of them are on the the longer usage scale.
Yeah, but there is not too much marketing when it comes from Microsoft side now to promote for people to start using SCOM. Everything is driven towards Azure and Azure Monitor, so I'm not so surprised that people are they're kind of drilled by Microsoft to go the cloud way, right?
Yeah, agree.
Yeah. No surprises, but equally, while there is some of that happening, the lion's share of companies are still very reliant on on-prem infrastructure. So yes, but yeah, on-prem is here forever, I think. We'll see more of that as we go through the deck. Let's move on now to what people are doing as far as how they're using MPs they're using, and how they're authoring their own MPs. Starting with, which third-party management packs paid for do you use? So this is 2020's data, focusing on the top 5 first. So we had Veeam as the winner by quite a way, followed by the F5 Big MP, which was the Haiku MP. Then we had the Citrix official management packs. Then we had the OpsLogix MPs with no specific version of what the monitoring provided. And then EasyTune. This year, if I bring on this year's data, Veeam still a runaway winner, which is kind of good to see that's sort of embedded there, but kind of frustrating at the same time that we're not seeing more of the sort of more current actively developed MPs winning, pushing forward there. But what we do see is Gritmatics have definitely won this year as far as biggest climber. They are now 3. They were right down at number, I don't even know what that is. Can't count without spending a bit of time on it. So that's really, really good to see. People are monitoring their Citrix deployments. OpsLogix, your VMware pack, people have told us which version this year, which is nice, of your MPs, which flavor they're using, the VMware monitoring capability. SquaredUp is up there, and nice, your MPs feature too, but people haven't told us which specific one. The other interesting point is from last year, F5 was number 3. It didn't feature at all in the results for 2021. So you could say, well, that could be down to people, different people responding, which is certainly true. But I would have expected it to have focused, to have featured a little bit. But there's a lot of data here. So I'm interested to get your take, panel.
I'll just pick up on the Citrix piece in Gritmatics, Bruce. I think broadly it's again a really good sign that the ecosystem is really healthy. Obviously, nice OpsLogix still continuing to deliver new management packs. Jonas, you mentioned the Kubernetes one there. Christian, nice coming out with new management packs all the time still. So I think it's really, really good to see sort of healthy ecosystem with those new management packs. But Gritmatics is great to see just because it's a new company, right? New vendor who spotted the opportunity there, especially with Citrix themselves deprecating their own management pack And yeah, really great to see sort of a new vendor emerge and succeed in the SCOM market with a management pack. So there is still demand for that. I think rewinding back to one of those previous slides about what you monitor outside of the Microsoft stack, it was VMware, Citrix, and Oracle. So those are really important to cover.
And interestingly, there wasn't much change in terms of the sort of the volumes of people that are monitoring Citrix, and that's kind of reflected in this data here, in that Veeam is winning. The old, now unsupported Citrix MPs are dropping off somewhere down here. So yeah, positive overall, and as you say, that Gritmatics are winning here. Any other thoughts, comments, panel?
Well, we don't see many installations these days that doesn't have SquaredUp installed, so I think these numbers are a little bit higher in the real world. So
that wouldn't surprise me, but then, so to my mind, I put that down to the word management packs, and when people think of SquaredUp, they think dashboards rather than MP. So there is an MP in the back end. So yeah, I suspect you're possibly right. There are questions around dashboarding tools coming up. Also, we'll see that in a second. Any other thoughts? The final other thought I had on this slide really was none is the runaway winner, which is either a resounding pat on the back for Microsoft in that, you guys have done such a good job of building MPs to what people want, or it says that people aren't willing to invest in buying management packs for SCOM. You decide which. I guess it's probably a mix of both, but there we go. It is the number one entry here. So there we are. Moving on. What do you primarily use to author custom monitoring? Well, the first thing to say is it's really good to see that most people do author some custom monitoring, with none, all the way down here, which is great. There are some changes at the top. This, to me, speaks of maturity. More people switching from using the SCOM console, which is, not the best way for authoring custom monitoring, to using VSAE and getting more technical. Also more use of PowerShell and Cookdown's free PowerShell MP, which is great. Any other questions from the panel or comments?
I think, I think as you see the use of VSAE growing, that's consistent with maturity, as you said, Bruce, and consistent with people going deeper in terms of their monitoring, and they want to dig deeper into applications, they want to dig deeper into services, and really that's, you can only go so far with the other sets of tools, where there are times where you need to go into VSAE to do really what you need to do. So
yeah, totally. The other thing to say on this is this was a multi-select. So there are people that select, say, VSAE and MP Studio, for example, as sort of complementary tools rather than just using one. But yeah. Any other questions or comments? And while you're thinking, I'm going to have a quick look at the questions, because there was one that was relevant here, which is, can Select MP Studio be used to create new management packs? I think the answer that this graph shows is yes, so I consider that question to be answered. But Harold, would you like to comment on it?
The answer is yes. Yeah, it certainly can.
Excellent news. All right, great. Moving on then to what do you primarily use for SCOM application monitoring? So I was expecting more growth here, to be honest, but there is some data to suggest that people are doing more application monitoring, which is that fewer people are not doing application monitoring. There aren't sort of large growth in any of the other bars, except for synthetic transaction monitoring and the other category. I didn't put up the data for what was in other, but essentially it was quite a lot of it was people not using SCOM, using other third-party tools for SCOM application for application monitoring. So you'd have tools in there like Dynatrace and AppDynamics, so APM tools in particular. But this was what the data showed. So good to see more people are again maturing and going forward with application monitoring. Comments, panel.
Well, I see distributed applications, but that's not really application monitoring. And sometimes I really run into this point, what is application monitoring actually at all? So, and I sometimes have the challenge to explain it, that exactly what you mentioned, Bruce, like that there are specific APM tools that do that. The closest we have URLGenie, which is, I think, I also know is a really good tool, so which can be used for our synthetic transactions. So, but they are really separate tools that are available. So I think a few do, but if more do, the better.
Yeah, very true. Also, we're saying, oh, go on.
I was going to say, we've talked about SCOM as the best of breed tool, which it is targeted at infrastructure monitoring, does that very well. So to some extent, it's sort of to be expected that that application monitoring is more of a stretch for SCOM. But just from my point of view, and sort of from point of view of dashboarding within SquaredUp, when people do focus on application monitoring on top of the infrastructure monitoring, that's when they really can translate that monitoring value to the business and show how they're not just looking at the health of servers, but actually looking at the health of the applications and the workloads running on those servers. And that's when we see a really big change in the perceived value of SCOM within the business when it's translated into application monitoring and what the business cares about.
Yeah, as you say, that is what the businesses are ultimately caring about these days, rather than just simply infrastructure monitoring. So it's great to see people succeed in that area. Moving on, partly in the interest of time, to the next sort of big trend the data has shown us, which is the shift to the cloud is happening. It's real. The thing that we've been talking about for the last 5 to 10 years of people moving stuff into from the data center into the cloud is happening. But as you can see from the data, it's not a massive swing. It's a slow and gradual process, which is in no way surprising because people have been using on-prem infrastructure for years and have experience and hardware and contracts tying them to on-prem. But we do see more people hosting SCOM. This is the management servers and the databases in the cloud this year than last year, 7% this year and only 3% last year. So it's happening, the shift to the cloud. Which is really, really cool. And there's more data to go into on this. So one of the questions was, what features do you want added to SCOM? I pulled out the top 5 from last year and from this year, partly to compare them, but also because the biggest area we see an increase in is more cloud monitoring and better integration with Azure Monitor. So this speaks to more people having a demand for monitoring cloudy stuff. Interestingly, in last year's top 5, we had SCOM as a service, which didn't feature at all in any 0% in this year's data, which is interesting. Possibly one to dig into at some point. Also, an increase in improved networking monitoring being asked for. No other changes in the other top 3. Improved dashboards natively. Obviously worth noting there are third-party solutions. SquaredUp's been mentioned a few times that will do dashboarding. Good service here. Modern consoles for both ops and admin features, has done every year, and easier custom authoring. Again, worth noting. So I like you guys in particular have great products in that area. But yes, lots of data here to suggest the shift to cloud is happening, is real, and there's a lot of demand for it. But panel, thoughts and comments, please.
I'm a little bit surprised to see that there is, the people still want to improve the network monitoring inside of SCOM, because it feels like network monitoring in general belongs somewhere else. We've done a lot of projects trying to implement it, but the SCOM, the network team doesn't want to work in SCOM because it's not built for it. But also when it comes to SCOM as a service, we provide that as a service, and we have only seen an increase in, providing SCOM as a service, probably due to the fact that there is, less people coming in, and they still want to use SCOM, but they don't have, the knowledge and the people working with it. So we still see an increase in that topic.
I don't think, as far as the fact that no one has put SCOM as a service this year, when you're thinking about what do you want from SCOM, it's quite a strange, very specific answer to provide. So to me, this comes down to more, in 2020, the public got wind that Microsoft were working on something in this area. So to my mind, it's more around that than necessarily people aren't interested in it. Akash, interested to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah. I mean, there were a few conversations on SCOM managed instance, SCOM as a service, early 2020. And then I believe SCOM, the SCOM-a-thon event happened, and then that's the service started. But yes, right now the conversation around SCOM managed instance has died down, because as of now we are keeping few things under wraps, and we want to make sure that we have the right information to share at the right time. So that's quite understandable. But the few takeaways that I see over here is on the better integration with cloud, as well as better monitoring for cloud platforms, right? And at the same time, there's a request for, or there is an ask for, to improve the visualization layer on SCOM, considering ops and web console have been around the same without any major changes between the last two versions. So yeah, that would be some of my key takeaways. And network monitoring, as Jonas mentioned, that is something which we need to still evaluate whether we want to get into it or not.
Yeah, I'll provide you, Akash, with the sort of unfiltered version of the data. So as far as improved network monitoring, there were some specifics in there. I think it was around SNMP-v3 support, but I can send you all the specifics as to what people have actually asked for. There's a question relating to SCOM as a service or SCOM managed instance in the chat that I'll quickly take now, which is there any new info on managed SCOM instance you want to share at this stage, Akash?
No, unfortunately, no.
Okay.
We will, as I mentioned, we'll share the right information at the right time when we have anything to talk about.
Yeah, makes total sense. I was expecting that answer. Then another question that's probably good to take now. Are there any plans to have more REST API capabilities for SCOM? This could, the reason why I'm bringing this up now, be sort of painted with a more cloud color, which is why I'm mentioning it now. I don't know whether you want to comment on that one, Akash?
And again, for System Center 2022, there are probably quite a couple of enhancements on the REST API, but nothing significant that we can talk about.
Yeah, okay, makes sense. The other thing to say on just APIs in general is, again, from Cookdown, we do have the ability to integrate SCOM with anything that supports webhooks, both getting stuff into SCOM and pushing stuff out of SCOM. So there are solutions. Also for HackerSCOM, which was the event we SCOMathon held back in December. The winning entry was a REST, an API MP, so from Nathan Foreman. So do go and check that out. It's free. It's a community solution. So there are things out there, both free and paid, that will fill this space that are worth looking at. All right. And that is the last slide I had on specific bits of data. So just now to wrap us up, I think this data is telling us is that cloud growth is real and is greater than on-prem, but on-prem is still growing as well. People aren't not doing infrastructure on-prem and only doing it in the cloud. There is growth across the board, which is really good, which means that hybrid is here to stay. We're not going to lose our on-prem data centers anytime soon and live in a cloud-only world. Over 50% of people that responded to the survey have said that they're planning to use more SCOM, to grow their use of SCOM, which is very, very positive. It means, SCOM is here to stay within individual companies as well, with more people investing in it. There aren't as many new SCOM administrators coming in as we might need to maintain SCOM. So if you've got a colleague or friend who's interested in monitoring, get them across to SCOMathon and get them all trained up and things. We need more of you guys out there to keep SCOM in tip-top shape. And the obvious final takeaway here is that SCOM is still very much best of breed for Microsoft monitoring. And those, I would say, are my takeaways. Klaus, any final thoughts, any takeaways from you guys?
I was just going to pick up, Bruce, on that last question around the roadmap for SCOM and sort of features. I hadn't caught the fact that the user voice feedback from SCOM had changed. So that's probably a good point to mention that. It's over on feedback.azure.com now, moved over a few months ago. So we always say this, keep the feedback coming. Akash, and team sort of obviously really appreciate that, and it helps them decide on the roadmap. So it's kind of had a reset, right? By moving it, all of the votes have sort of reset back down to 0. So it's a really good opportunity now to get across to the new site and vote for your favorite feature and the thing you're most keen to see in SCOM, and make sure that that gets fed into the roadmap. As I say, look forward to SCOM 2022 and many more years to come.
Completely agree. It is worth sort of stating a little bit of what you've just said again, that the SCOM product team, so Akash and your team, do check that forum. So if you want to get something directly to Akash and team, there's the place to go and put it. Any final closing thoughts?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for highlighting that, Rich. And thank you, Bruce, for having this big survey and sharing some of the customer voice that we may not hear in our user feedback or we may not hear in the the customer calls that we usually have. And it's great to see the partners that we have on the call as well, from Ops.zig, Silek, Nice, and all of them, and SquaredUp Cookdown as well, contributing at the places where the product is lacking. right? And then we continue to work together and make sure that the customers are benefited at the end of the day.
Makes sense. Thank you. Any other closing remarks and thoughts from my panel?
Yeah, one thing that I would like to bring up is that, we say here that cloud, it's growing, it's greater than on-prem, but we also see a lot of growth when it comes to the private cloud. So people actually, they develop their applications in the managed cloud, but there is still a lot of growth with the private cloud that goes back into on-prem that requires a lot of monitoring. So I think it's really important just when we talk about cloud that it's different pieces, and the growth of cloud is really big, but it doesn't mean that it will be by a managed provider as well.
Yeah, I think overall, I think what we're seeing, infrastructure continues to grow, whether that's on premise, probably more so in the cloud. A good point, Jonas, on the private cloud. And I think more people are getting involved. There are more chefs in the kitchen, so to speak, which leads to some interesting scenarios and some interesting challenges for organizations. But I think the results of the survey really sort of speak to those factors, and SCOM remains best of breed for infrastructure, particularly Windows infrastructure and certainly some Windows applications. And again, I think the survey vets that out. And just while I've got the podium, I want to thank Bruce Cookdown for the event, and Richard as well, SquaredUp. Fantastic event. Always wonderful to connect with the community and get feedback like this.
No, not at all. Glad you could make it. Thank you for being here.
Great. Okay, my closing words here. I think it's about you who's all listening to this because for me, this is all about the community. So I want to really clap my hand for all of you staying on over the hour we are on here now. And I like to see the community growing. And I think this is why we are here, or I'm at least here also for the community. And if there's a question, I was open to help to answer them. And thanks, of course, Bruce, to you for hosting this.
Not at all. No, thank you to all of you for being here. Before we sort of close things off, firstly, yes, apologies for slightly overrunning. Hopefully it's been as interesting for you to overrun as it has been for me. Before we close, just want to quickly get a few words on the companies that go to make SCOMathon and the companies that our panel work for, so you can hear more about what they do. Obviously, everything that we do is related to SCOM, right? So if you are struggling with some SCOM-specific solution, one of our companies will be able to help you, maybe multiple of our companies. So I'm going to start with, let's go left to right on my webcam. So I'm going to start with you, Harold. Let's hear about Silect.
Well, Silect, as hopefully most of you know, we provide a range of solutions for SCOM and for System Center in general, particularly around authoring and managing the MP lifecycle. And I guess while I'm speaking, I'll put a plug in for MP University, which is a twice yearly event for the community. It's a completely free event. And it's designed, just like a lot of the SCOMathon events are designed, really to help the community, help build knowledge in the community, and help everyone ultimately become more successful with their investments in SCOM.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with that. MPU often gets the great Kevin Holman as well as a speaker, which is a great reason to go along in itself. If you don't know who he is, you haven't been around SCOM for very long, just Google him. It's worth doing, I promise. Thank you. Christian, would you like to go next?
Yes, thanks. We from NICE have the largest selection of third-party management packs available in our portfolio, focusing from Linux on Power over to Microsoft 365, all the way to Domino exotic products, right? So, but also with VMware and Oracle, one of our top management packs here available. So we are basically a team of SCOM enthusiasts, really working around the clock, around the globe with different office locations on the development of management packs and providing the extensions that are required to do a full scope monitoring of your infrastructure, not only Microsoft, also going into the different sales. So that's to keep it in a nutshell. And we do provide community solutions with our free log file management pack and others. So just to keep it short, thank you.
Thank you, Christian. Perfect. Jonas, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. So, well, OpsLogix is providing management packs for, VMware. We are talking about Oracle management packs, now Kubernetes, but we also have already a Microsoft Teams connection that you can have. But something that, we also do a lot of work with is the consultancy services that we might not, promote as much, but we have for over 10 years worked with successful SCOM implementations where we both provide consultancy and also SCOM as a managed service. So that's something worth shouting out.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Rich, I'll come back to you because actually I have a slide for SquaredUp as one of the sponsors. So not going to deliberately hold you, just going to go through the final slides to mention one other company, which is Cookdown, which is the company I work for. We make code-free integrations for SCOM to allow you to connect SCOM with the power of Connection Center to ITSM tools like ServiceNow with deep bidirectional integration, also Sharewell, but also messaging tools like Teams and Slack, but ultimately anywhere you like with the power of the webhook, so you can connect SCOM to anywhere. And here we go, cue the logos. This is essentially anywhere that will accept a webhook logo. There will be more. We also allow you to get alerts into SCOM from anywhere that will push alerts via webhook as well. So a very powerful product and portfolio of products. We do more than that. We also do alert tuning stuff as well, but go and check it all out at cookdown.com. We offer free trials of all our paid for products. We have many free products as well. You can also take a demo there as well. Rich, now I come to you. You have slides.
Well, yeah, just I'll keep it brief. Not so secret sauce for SCOM success. Hopefully, with the survey there, we all know that SCOM is so much better with some great dashboards and data visualization on top of it to really unlock that data. All I'll say is SquaredUp is a lot easier to get up and running than most people expect. It has no back-end database. We sit purely on top of SCOM and connect directly into SCOM. So it only takes a few minutes to install and immediately transforms your use of SCOM and how it's perceived within the business. So please do try and set aside a few minutes in 2022 to go check it out if you haven't already.
Perfect. Thank you very much. All right. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Q&A. We've taken a good few questions as we've been going. I've been trying to pepper them in, so we're not left with a mountain of questions out of context. But let's see if there are any final questions. I'm just going to get my phone out of my pocket again and check the Slack channel.
Is anyone still on after?
There are a large number of people still on, so we'll give it a few minutes to see. Let's see. There's nothing in the Slack channel that hasn't been answered, I don't think. No. It's worth noting from the Slack, there's a link there to the SCOM product group's feedback forum, feedback.azure.com. So do go and check that out. There's a question. Is there any certification training on Excel to Azure Monitor? I don't think you've got the right audience to answer that question, but let's see. Anyone know of any certification that will cover integrating Excel and Azure Monitor? Silence. I was expecting that. I don't think you've got the right audience, the right panel for such a question, I'm afraid. Are there any other questions from anyone else? Let me just go back to Slack and see. My phone buzzed, but it was something entirely unrelated. That's the downside of phones. All right, I think that means there is nothing else. So all that's left to do is to say thank you. Thank you to all of you who make up my panel today. Thank you, Harold. Thank you, Christian, Rich, Akash, and Jonas. Really appreciate you taking the time to be here with me today and to share your wisdom and your thoughts on SCOM. So thank you. And of course, thank you to everyone who is attending today's webinar, whether you're attending live or you're attending by watching the video replay. We wouldn't be here doing this without you. We are a SCOM community. We're here for you. And the final thing to say is, of course, we're back next month, as we are every month, with another coffee break webinar. And if you go to scomathon.com, you have the full Big SCOM Survey results. If you want to pick over it yourself, it's all going to be up there. All the data will be there, including a whole bunch of the charts you've seen today. So thank you very much, everyone. And until next time we speak, thank you. Have a good month. Cheers. Bye all.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.